Hey there, let's set our finishing touches and bring this project home. First, the nose, which we'll start to create by using an ellipse. Make it 70 by 40 pixels, and I advise you to zoom in as we're about to warp it manually without any specific numbers in mind. Before we do that, center it on the body layer and position it somewhere near the bottom of your eyes. Hit Ctrl-T, right-click and choose Warp. You'll get this grid, and what I'm aiming for is to create something that resembles a triangle with its tip pointing down. So grab this side and move it inwards. Now move over to the other side and repeat the process. Bring these points together. Inevitably, you'll have one part slightly different than the other one, but don't worry about it, it doesn't have to be pixel perfect, just do your best. Plus, if you hit Enter and you're not liking your result, enter Warp mode yet again. It's true Photoshop won't show you where you've left things, but you can still further manipulate it until you get something that looks like this. Here, I'm happy with it. In case you can't manage, grab the pen tool, bring up the sketch and start clicking. OK, I'm good to go, so I'll double-click its thumbnail and I'll change its colour to FF71BB, which is a lovely pink. I'll continue this line from my eyes that relies on strokes, so let's add one here. It should be set on the outside of our shape with 2 pixels for the thickness. For the colour, CC2E7F is perfect. Next, I'll add the same 2-punch inner shadow combination. The top one is as follows. Normal set at 100%. The pink I'm going with is FFB6DC. Angle is 90 degrees. As for the distance and size, 4 and 13 pixels respectively will do the trick. For the bottom inner shadow, we have a more powerful pink, D2418C. This is set to normal, but the angle should be reversed, minus 90 degrees. 4 pixels for the distance, 13 for the size, and we're done with our cute nose. For the mouth, we could use ellipses as well, but I'm not personally fond of this approach. Instead, I'll grab the sketch and I'll place it above all my layers. Now I'll drop its opacity and I'll try to match it with my design to the best of my ability. Looking good so far. Grab the pen tool and let's create this mouth shape. Start from this top middle point by clicking once. Next, click and drag for the left side, but don't worry, I know it seems like we're going in the wrong direction. Hold Alt and convert this anchor point. Great. Now we can click somewhere near the middle of this mouth, but if you can't manage to mirror this top anchor point, remember you can hold the Control key and nudge this into place. In general, I'm very particular about being pixel perfect. Here, I don't think it's worth too much trouble. Speaking of that, let's hold Alt and click again as we close this shape off and we'll duplicate it. This makes much more sense than trying to manually create a matching right side. So position your duplicate on the right side and flip it horizontally. Great job so far. Merge them together with Ctrl-E and let's change its colour. FF71BB is what I chose, and as you can imagine, we're not going to leave it as is. Let's start with an inner shadow. Blend mode normal, opacity 100%. BF2C79 for the colour code with an angle of 90 degrees. Set the distance to 14 pixels and adjust the size slider to 27. We haven't used any drop shadows so far, but it's time to get them involved. The top one should be set to normal and I'll use a cream colour, FE-D673, angle 90 degrees with 5 pixels for the distance and 6 for the size. For the second one, change the angle to minus 90 degrees and the colour should be a bright orange, E0590F. And that wraps up our layer styles for this layer. Please note that it's essential we position it underneath the nose layer in this panel. Otherwise, all these effects are going to bleed over it and we don't want that to happen. As you're repositioning the mouth, you may notice the 2 halves that created this shape. If you want to get rid of them, while on the ellipse tool, go to the options bar. From here, click on this icon and hit Merge Shape Components, and that does exactly what it says. It permanently fuses those 2 shapes together. Let's see what else we can do to spice up this design. We haven't created any cheeks, so let's handle that through the ellipse tool. Click and set these values. 215 for the width, 130 for the height. Make it white and position it somewhere near the eye region. Ideally, this should follow the contour of this shape, but if that's not the case, warp it and it's bound to fit. Not to mention you could use the pen or direct selection tool on it. Next, we'll add a layer mask and swipe a few times. As I'm doing this in the background, let me tell you these types of designs take a lot of energy and discussions. When we decided on a mascot at our office for SMS Plus, we spent a lot of time brainstorming and voting for various ideas. Afterwards, one of our best designers, Alex V, sketched something out, and after a lot of back and forth, we ended up with Octi. Okay, back to our project. The cheeks are set, but I want to create a snout as well. So resize one of the shape layers and place it somewhere near the nose. You want to leave a few extra pixels above it, but most likely you'll need to turn down the opacity. If these three layers overlap with each other, I suggest you swipe a few more times on this central piece. That should fix any issues. Give me a moment while I do this. Okay, this is done. The next thing I want to address is the glare in its eyes. You saw them in the sketch and they're a great touch. Start with a rounded rectangle that's 30 by 70 pixels. Set the corner radius to 15 pixels. Make it white and hit Ctrl-T. Rotate it to about 145 degrees from the options bar. This requires a pretty interesting layer style, so let's drop our fill to 0% and enable a gradient overlay. Set it to Linear Dodge Add. Change the opacity to 60% and set the angle to 135 degrees. As for the actual colours, we'll first click on this second swatch, which is a pre-made gradient. Grab the lower left handle and remove it from this area. I've done nothing else, I've just dragged it away and Photoshop removed it. As for the right side, double-click this bottom handle and make it pure white. This is the gradient we're looking for, but it doesn't seem all that special because we need to hit reverse. Okay, now this is much more like it. Now the tricky part, we need to warp it. Hit Ctrl-T and right-click. You know the procedure at this point. My advice is you follow my steps on the screen, even though you should realise this is more of a personal preference. I like to try and match this curvature with my shape, but also leave enough room for a second one. This is pretty time-consuming, but it is an essential step. Note that the warp command is the same, no matter if you activate it from the options bar or if you right-click after you've used Ctrl-T. I'll fast forward as there's nothing interesting going on here, just constant refinement. That's going to be the case for the other shape too. My advice is you not be afraid of messing it up. If that happens, start over. And if you're having a particularly hard time, open up my final result and use it as a guide. You can always switch to the pen tool and create these shapes. Here, I'm happy with it, so let's continue with the last finishing touches. Let's create a shadow that will go behind these front paws. First, we need to make sure we have a group that contains the body and both these shapes. Okay, here we go. Next, create an ellipse that's 485 by 135 pixels. This needs to be clipped to our folder and, of course, centered. For the color code, use C6 6C 3A. We're not done. Change the blend mode to multiply from the top of the layers panel. I always want it feathered, but instead of using a Gaussian blur, I'll rely on my properties panel. Click here and drag this up to 9 pixels. Now this is looking nice, and since we're talking about shadows, let's create one that shows this cute guy is standing on the ground. With the ellipse tool, click and input 555 for the width and 70 pixels for the height. This needs to be a dark purple, so go with 810096. Change its mode to multiply as this will increase its weight. Place it underneath all your layers and center it with the body layer. I personally prefer to use the marquee tool when I'm working with wide shapes and I need to center them horizontally. That's because I avoid any headaches that might occur due to an unforeseen positioning of the body layer. That's bound to happen if your shadow is wider than it. Okay, finally, let's feather it. That's done from the properties panel. Go with 10 pixels and everything should be good to go. You might want to tone down its opacity to about 50% or so, but that's up to you. You can always revisit it later. Finally, I'll add a vignette effect. Let me show you a cool way to create it. Start with a new empty layer. Use Shift F5 and fill it with 50% grey. This is a fantastic technique. Now change its blend mode to overlay, which makes it look like it went away. Now convert it to a smart object, though this is optional. Next, go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Don't worry about all these settings, we're looking for the FX tab. From here, move the amount slider to -50, and this will darken the edges of our canvas. Since it's a smart object, you can always go back and further refine it. That's a cool way of creating a vignette effect on a separate, apparently transparent layer. The design is now done. I hope you found the process interesting. In the next lecture, I'll share some thoughts about how you should approach things. I'll see you there.